When his three sons realized they could no longer balance their busy lives with caring for their aging father, they made what seemed like the best decision possible. They hired a caregiver, someone trained, someone trusted. A woman who promised to bring comfort, companionship, and dignity to the final years of their father's life. At first, everything seemed right. The meals were prepared, the medications given on time, the loneliness lifted. But as the weeks passed, troubling began to surface. Complaints from their father that sounded too strange to be true. They dismissed them, until the day those warnings became undeniable, and what started as an act of care ended in an untimely death.
It was October 5th in Columbus, Ohio. The air carried the faint crispness of early fall, the kind that reminds you the year is winding down. On Willow Creek Lane, an ordinary street lined with modest homes and aging oak trees, a 78-year-old man named Richard Wallace lived alone. His wife had passed away years earlier, and his three sons, Tyler, Logan, and Noah, were grown men, each lost in the rush of their own lives. Tyler, the eldest, managed a busy finance job in Chicago. Logan worked long shifts as a nurse in Cincinnati, and Noah, the youngest, was still trying to find his footing, juggling part-time jobs while finishing graduate school in Boston. They all loved their father deeply, but like many families, spread thin by distance and responsibility, none of them could be there every day. Richard, once a strong, capable man, was slowing down. Arthritis made even simple tasks difficult, and his memory was beginning to falter at times. After weeks of discussion, the brothers agreed on a decision they believed was best. They would hire a caregiver, someone who could be with his father daily, help him with meals, medication, and company, someone who could give him the attention they no longer could. When they found Ama Boateng, a 35-year-old nurse originally from Ghana, she seemed like the perfect answer. Her references were good, her smile warm, and she spoke of her passion for caring for the elderly. Richard himself was hesitant at first. He was proud and didn't like the idea of a stranger living in his home. But eventually, he gave in. The arrangement felt simple. Ama would move in part-time, ensuring he was never alone for long stretches. At first, everything appeared fine. Ama cooked his meals, reminded him of his medication, even read the newspaper aloud when his eyesight strained. Tyler, Logan, and Noah checked in when they could, reassured by their father's early comments, "He's helpful, I think I'll manage with her around." It was a relief, a weight lifted from their shoulders. But what began as comfort would over time turn into suspicion, and what started as gratitude would end in tragedy. Before we go deeper into this story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. At this point, Richard Wallace was just another elderly man adjusting to life with help. No one could have predicted that this very decision, the act of hiring one caregiver, would set into motion a series of events that his family would later regret for the rest of their lives.
In the weeks after Ama Boateng began working inside the Wallace home, everything appeared ordinary from the outside. The sons, Tyler, Logan, and Noah, felt relieved that their father finally had someone close to him. To them, Ama was respectful, polite, and efficient. She arrived early, kept the house in order, and always spoke with a calm, steady tone. For three young men balancing families and demanding jobs, it felt like a blessing. But behind Richard Wallace's closed doors, the picture was not so simple. Richard, now in his late 70s, had lived a long life built on discipline and order. He had served in the military, built a career in construction, and raised his boys after losing his wife years earlier. For a man of his nature, little details mattered. He noticed when things were out of place. He remembered the way his late wife arranged the living room, the smell of his morning coffee, even how the blinds were tilted to catch the morning sun. So when those details began to shift, Richard felt it in his bones. At first, it was subtle. His wallet was not in the drawer where he always kept it. A small medicine bottle was left half open on the kitchen counter. A family photo, one of his favorites of the boys fishing as teenagers, was moved from its frame and tucked behind a stack of mail. These were small things, explainable things. He told himself perhaps his memory was slipping. But as days passed, the pattern deepened. Richard noticed that his prescriptions seemed lighter than they should have been. He noticed Amma spending long moments on the phone in hushed tones, switching quickly to casual chatter when she realized he was watching. One evening, Richard tried to bring it up with Tyler, his eldest. He explained that something felt wrong, that maybe Amma wasn't as perfect as she appeared. Tyler, juggling the call between meetings, gently brushed him off. "Dad, you've been under a lot of stress. Amma's helping you. Just try to relax, okay?" Richard agreed outwardly, but inside he felt dismissed. A few nights later, Logan and Noah stopped by for a quick visit. He tried again, repeating his worries. Logan squeezed his shoulder and laughed it off, saying, "Dad, maybe it's just old age. You're misplacing things, that's normal." Noah, the youngest, nodded in agreement. None of them wanted to believe that the woman they had trusted with their father's care could be anything less than honest. Richard Wallace was left with a quiet unease, the kind of worry that lingers even when no one believes you. He began writing notes to himself, lists of what he had in the house, how much medication was in each bottle, and where he kept his personal belongings. To Richard, this was not paranoia. It was survival. Every day felt heavier, because in his heart, he believed he was being watched in his own home. Yet, to everyone else, life went on as if nothing was wrong. Before we continue, let me pause for a moment. How would you feel if your own father told you that the person you trusted to care for him might be taking advantage of his vulnerability? Would you believe him immediately? Or would you, like Tyler, Logan, and Noah, assume he was simply being forgetful? Before we go deeper into this story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos.
By late November, Richard Wallace's unease had grown into something he could no longer ignore. He was a man who had trusted his instincts his entire life, on the construction sites where one wrong move could cost a life, in the military where awareness meant survival, and even in raising his 3 sons after their mother passed. Now, in his old age, those instincts screamed that something was wrong inside his own home. It wasn't just the misplaced items anymore. Richard began to notice patterns. His pain medication, the one he relied on for his arthritis, ran out faster than the doctor's schedule suggested. He started marking the bottles with a pen, noting the number of pills each morning. Days later, the numbers didn't match. Someone was taking them. He also realized his checkbook, usually kept neatly inside the drawer, had pages missing. A few checks had been written, signed in shaky handwriting that was not his own. One evening, Richard decided to test his suspicions. As Amma prepared dinner in the kitchen, he quietly left a folded $20 bill on the coffee table and walked into his bedroom. From behind the slightly cracked door, he watched. Minutes later, Amma passed through the living room. Her eyes lingered on the bill. She hesitated, looked over her shoulder, then quickly slid it into her apron pocket. Richard's heart sank. His doubts were no longer doubts, they were reality. He confronted her gently that night. "Amma, I'm missing some money.
"Do you know anything about it?" She smiled, calm and collected, replying, "Oh, Mr. Wallace, maybe you misplaced it. Don't worry, I'll help you look." Her words were sweet, her tone reassuring, but Richard had seen it with his own eyes. The next morning, Richard called Tyler. His voice trembled with frustration as he explained what he had witnessed. Tyler listened, but remained skeptical. "Dad, are you sure? Amma's been nothing but kind. Maybe you just thought you saw something." Richard's anger flared. "I know what I saw, Tyler. She's stealing from me." But the conversation ended unresolved, as Tyler promised to keep an eye on things, but offered no real action. Days passed. Richard grew quieter, more withdrawn. The betrayal weighed heavily on him. His sons, each caught in the whirlwind of their own lives, didn't see the depth of his fear. Logan stopped by one weekend, finding his father sitting alone in the dimly lit living room. Richard tried again to explain, pointing at his empty pill bottle and missing checks. Logan sighed. "Dad, maybe you're just forgetting to take your pills. Stress can do that. Please don't worry so much." But worry was all Richard could do. The home he once built as a place of safety now felt unsafe. At night, he began locking his bedroom door. He wrote more notes in his shaky handwriting, recording everything: times Amma arrived, the food she cooked, even the expressions on her face. He was creating his own evidence, desperately trying to prove to someone, anyone, that his fears were real. Yet outside those walls, his sons continued to see Amma as a hard-working caregiver. The gap between Richard's warnings and his children's belief grew wider with every passing day, and Richard Wallace, once the strong provider, now found himself unheard in his greatest moment of need. What happens next will test not just Richard's instincts, but the bond between father and sons, a bond that may not survive what is about to unfold.
By December, the tension inside Richard Wallace's home had reached a breaking point. What began as small doubts had now grown into a storm of fear, frustration, and isolation. Richard's body was beginning to betray him. Once a man who prided himself on his independence, he now struggled with sudden waves of dizziness, unexplained fatigue, and nights where sleep came only in brief, restless stretches. To Richard, the cause was obvious. His pills were being tampered with, or taken altogether. He told his sons this again and again, but the conversations rarely ended well. One Sunday afternoon, Logan stopped by after church. He found his father sitting at the kitchen table, papers spread out in front of him, scribbled notes, check stubs, and the pill bottles he had been marking with his pen. Richard pointed at them with a shaky hand. "Look, Logan, you see this? The count doesn't add up. The doctor gave me 30 pills. There should be at least 12 left. There's only 5. Somebody's taking them." Logan frowned, scanning the table. "Dad, maybe you miscounted? Or maybe you've just been more forgetful lately." The words cut deep. Richard slammed his hand against the table. "I am not losing my mind. I know what's happening here, but none of you want to see it." Amma, who had been standing in the doorway quietly watching, stepped forward. Her voice was calm, almost too calm. "Mr. Wallace, you must not stress yourself like this. The boys are only worried for you. Maybe it is best if I handle your medication for now." Richard's eyes burned with anger. "No, I'll take care of myself. You stay away from my pills." The air in the room grew heavy. Logan shifted uncomfortably, glancing between his father and Amma. He wanted to believe his father, but Amma's steady, professional demeanor made Richard look paranoid in comparison. Later that evening, Richard called Tyler, his oldest son, in desperation. His voice cracked as he spoke into the phone. "Tyler, listen to me. If something happens to me, it won't be an accident. Amma isn't who you think she is. Promise me you'll believe me then." Tyler sighed. "Dad, please,
"You've got to stop this. Amma's been helping you. You're making yourself sick with all this suspicion." But Richard's instincts refused to let him rest. He began hiding what little money he had left, stuffing bills into old shoes and under couch cushions. He started eating less of the food Amma prepared, sometimes discarding it when she wasn't looking. He even whispered to Noah during a brief visit, "Watch her. Please, son, watch her closely." Yet Noah, juggling his own family and work, gave a distracted nod and brushed it aside as the worries of an aging man. By Christmas, the Wallace household was a home divided. Amma still moved about the house with quiet authority, cooking, cleaning, answering calls when the sons weren't around. To outsiders, she was the dependable caregiver, but inside Richard felt trapped, silenced, and dismissed by the very children he had raised. And then, just days after the holiday, Richard collapsed in the living room. When Amma called 911, her voice was frantic, rehearsed with just enough panic to sound convincing. For Richard, this was no accident. For him, this was the very nightmare he had warned his sons about. But for Tyler, Logan, and Noah, the question was only beginning. Had their father's fears been real all along? Or was this collapse just the natural decline of an aging man?
Richard Wallace was rushed by ambulance to St. Mary's Medical Center, a mid-sized hospital just 20 minutes outside of Dayton. When he arrived, he was conscious, but barely. His breathing was shallow, his words slurred. The ER nurses worked quickly, attaching monitors, drawing blood, and starting fluids. For the first time, the sons stood together in one place, Tyler, Logan, and Noah, watching their father through the glass partition of the emergency bay. None of them spoke at first. They were shaken, afraid, and silently wrestling with guilt. Tyler finally broke the silence. "This is what he's been warning us about. He said this would happen." Logan shook his head. "Ty, you're letting him get in your head. Dad's 74. Collapses happen at that age. We can't keep pointing fingers without proof." But Noah, the youngest, glanced over at Amma, who stood at the far end of the waiting room, her hands folded neatly, her eyes wet, as though she'd been crying. Something about her calmness unsettled him. Minutes later, a doctor in a white coat approached the sons. Dr. Stephen Klein, mid-40s, direct but compassionate. He held a clipboard, scanning the notes. "Your father's stable for now, but his labs, they raise questions. His system shows a mix of medications that don't match what he's been prescribed. Did any of you authorize a change in his medication?" The brothers exchanged confused looks. "No," Tyler said firmly. "He's only supposed to be on heart meds and blood pressure pills. That's it." Dr. Klein frowned. "Well, that's not what we found. There are traces of sedatives, strong ones. These aren't prescribed for him." A heavy silence fell. The words seemed to hang in the sterile air of the hospital corridor. Logan tried to rationalize. Could it be a pharmacy error? Maybe they mixed something up with his refills. The doctor shook his head. "Unlikely. This dosage, this wasn't an accident. Someone had to give him these." The suspicion, once only Richard's lonely voice, was now spoken by a professional. And for the first time, the sons felt the weight of doubt pressing in on them. As the brothers sat in the waiting area, their conversation grew tense. Tyler's jaw was tight. "We should have listened to him. He told us Amma was messing with his meds." Logan fired back. "Hold on, you can't just accuse her without facts. We don't know what's going on." But Noah, staring across the room at Amma, whispered, "What if Dad was right? What if she's the reason he's here right now?" Meanwhile, Amma remained in her seat, occasionally dabbing her eyes with a tissue. To anyone else in the waiting room, she looked like a devoted caregiver, deeply shaken by her patient's condition. But inside the Wallace family, the seeds of suspicion had finally taken root. And when hospital staff quietly notified the local police, standard protocol for suspected medication tampering, the story of Richard Wallace's collapse was no longer just a family crisis. It had officially become a case.
By the evening of October 5, word had spread through the halls of St. Mary's Medical Center. The Wallace family situation was no longer just a medical case. It was now under the eye of law enforcement. Detective Carla Jennings, a seasoned investigator from the Montgomery County Sheriff's Department, arrived at the hospital shortly after 8 p.m. A woman in her early 40s with a reputation for being both methodical and patient, Jennings wasn't the type to make quick accusations. But the report from the ER doctor about unexplained sedatives demanded her attention. She began simply with the sons. The three men sat together in a small consultation room, a square table separating them from the detective. Tyler leaned forward, arms crossed, visibly restless. Logan sat back, trying to maintain composure. Noah kept his eyes down, his foot tapping nervously on the floor. Detective Jennings clicked on a small recorder and spoke calmly. "Gentlemen, I understand this is a stressful night. I need to ask a few questions to get a clear picture of your father's care. First, has anyone besides you three and the caregiver Amamensa had access to your father's medication?" The brothers exchanged quick glances. Tyler answered first. "No, just us and Amma, but mostly Amma. She handles his daily routine." Jennings nodded. "And have there been any recent disputes between your father and Amma? Anything worth noting?" Logan shifted uncomfortably. "Look, my dad, he's been saying some things. He felt Amma wasn't giving him his meds properly, but you have to understand, he's been forgetful lately. We didn't want to accuse her without reason." Tyler cut in sharply. "Except now he's in the hospital because no one took him seriously." The tension between the brothers was visible, and Jennings didn't miss it.